This 4-year-old beggar girl finds a millionaire being beaten by a soldier on a rural road, but she takes the soldier's gun and does something that shocks everyone. Please comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The screams sliced through the muggy afternoon air like a blade, echoing through the cobblestone streets at precisely 3 o'clock. The 52-year-old businessman nearly dropped his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxurious apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the colonial house across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue window frames that starkly contrasted with the elegance of the modern building where he lived. His stock market investments had paid off so handsomely that he had been able to buy that property in one of the most upscale areas of the historic town. But not all his wealth could silence the torment coming from across the street. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie before returning to work. As the owner of the largest construction company in the region, he was accustomed to solving complex problems, but he preferred to keep his distance from other people's dramas. Especially after 5 years of living alone, ever since he lost his wife on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the colonial house, the 4-year-old girl cowered in the corner of the kitchen. She was too young to understand why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman tightly held a metal spoon that she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from the alcohol, fixed on the little girl who trembled before her. "You're a curse on this house," the aunt hissed, her voice slurred from the cheap whiskey she'd been drinking since noon. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her skinny arms. The child bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt more, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember the soft voice of her mother, singing that song before she went to sleep. It was all that remained of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whimpering," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you smear the walls again with that filthy charcoal, you'll see what real punishment is." The girl ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The businessman stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His wife used to sing it when she cooked, a popular tune that spoke about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the colonial house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something different from simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that struck a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. In the house next door to the colonial house, the 61-year-old retired teacher was watering her begonias when she heard the girls singing. Unlike the businessman, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress, and that voice carried a pain that made her heart ache. "That's strange," she thought, observing the windows of the house. The family who lived there had been known for decades. The aunt had always been problematic, but since she took custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in the historic town. The teacher dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. The businessman remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The music had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories that he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of a former employee who had abruptly resigned 5 years ago, a few months before the accident. She was a kind woman, always humming while organizing the construction company's files. Then suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal letter of resignation and many unanswered questions. He had never thought about her again, until he heard that familiar song echoing from a house where a child seemed to suffer in silence. The sun began to set over the mountains when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her small fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, the businessman closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something that he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. His net worth in dollars, his investments in Bitcoin, all his fortune accumulated over the years. None of that could silence the echo of that childish voice that continued to resonate in his mind. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical hustle of the historic town awakening for another day. The retired teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that didn't leave her in peace, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the colonial house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The aunt opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning," said the teacher with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've talked properly." The aunt hesitated, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, teacher, it's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The teacher took a step forward, forcing the aunt to back away. "And I would very much like to meet your niece. I heard she's a lovely girl." The aunt's face hardened for a moment before forcing a weak smile. "The girl is sick, high fever. Better not get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher perked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Perhaps I can help," the educator insisted. "I have experience with sick children. I raised 3 children. You know how it is." "No need, no," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a cold. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the aunt's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her, even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confused dreams where a child's voice mixed with memories of his former employee. When he saw the teacher at the door of the colonial house, a strange curiosity washed over him. His businesses generated so much profit that he rarely had to worry about other people's problems, but something about that situation caught his attention. The teacher finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not without casting an investigative glance into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. Inside the colonial house, The aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouched behind the table trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height did not allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the aunt growled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty," the girl murmured, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" The aunt laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the yard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay outside until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal that she had found near the stove. They were always birds, small, big, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the girl in the yard under the hot midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to hum her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the ears of the businessman again. This time he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar in that voice, in that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee hummed that same song while she worked. The woman who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. The employee who always spoke fondly about her little daughter. A girl named... what was it? Lily, the businessman murmured, the cell phone trembling in his hands. His former employee's daughter was named Lily. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. The child who was suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made that connection before? The businessman put away his cell phone and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered his former employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems in the company, that he hadn't paid proper attention. Now, 5 years later, his former employee's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including the regret for not helping his employee when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock punctually, the screams started again. This time the businessman didn't step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as through the kitchen window of the colonial house he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands. It appeared to be a kitchen utensil, and gesticulating violently towards a small figure that he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time the businessman couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. His stock dividends, his capital invested in funds, all his passive income, none of that mattered in the face of what he had just witnessed. The question now was, what would he do with that information? That night, the girl slept on the floor of the backyard, where the aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her out of that place of pain. Across the street, the businessman couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since the departure of his wife. 3 days had passed since the businessman discovered the identity of the child, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few yards from her home. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the colonial house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting a new direct visit to the aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from where she had the best view of the backyard of the colonial house. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the tree completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the educator, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," said the girl in her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, my dear," replied the teacher, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" The girl glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "Yes, I am. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the child, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the teacher's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Girl! Where are you?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at the teacher with an expression that screamed for help. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen, the burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice. Everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the businessman had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could see the yard partially, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same town where he lived. And now that child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best business attire, took a tray of homemade cookies that she had prepared as a pretext, and headed again to the colonial house. This time, she would not take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly irritated by the neighbor's insistence. "Teacher, I already told you it's not a good time." "Dear, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," interrupted the teacher firmly, "and I insist on getting to know the little one better. As old neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom had given her. The interior of the colonial house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The girl is sleeping," lied the aunt, blocking the path to the back of the house. "That's a shame. Maybe another time then," said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the stove, and mainly small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The teacher and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "Must be the neighbor's cat," said the aunt quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The teacher smiled and nodded, but had decided she had already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But remember that I'm always next door if you need anything." "Anything at all?" The teacher's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the teacher left, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl curled up behind the stove, trying to hide. The child had cried when she heard the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already shining with the familiar fury. "No, aunt, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt took the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the flame. The girl recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to get attention, don't you?" hissed the aunt as the spoon heated up. "Want the neighbors to come here asking questions? Think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, the businessman had positioned his cell phone at the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. His compound interest, his financial assets, all his accumulated profitability, none of that had value if he continued to be a coward. While the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the businessman made a call he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the girl's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life." That night, after the aunt fell asleep drunk on the living room couch, the girl managed to slip silently into the backyard. Her new burns stung, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the tree and looked at the stars, humming softly her mother's song. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering, and that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The lawyer arrived at the businessman's apartment on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been colleagues at university almost 3 decades ago, and the lawyer knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. Therefore, the urgent phone call from the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said the lawyer, sitting down in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The businessman poured coffee and stood near the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She is being mistreated by the aunt who takes care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked the lawyer, taking a notepad out of his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." The businessman paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, evidence of what's been happening." The lawyer was silent for a moment, processing the information. "This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," replied the businessman, running his hands over his face. "But there's something else. My former employee worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly in 2019, a few months before my wife's accident. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible," completed the lawyer, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The businessman nodded. "If I had paid more attention back then, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with that woman." At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and the lawyer could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "Does this happen every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 o'clock, religiously. But sometimes at other times too," replied the businessman, picking up his cell phone. "Want to see the recordings?" The lawyer watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something about the systematization of that violence deeply disturbed him. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the District Attorney's Office. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, the girl was living another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the girl had made on the kitchen wall during the early hours. "How many times do I have to tell you not to smear the walls?" screamed the aunt, holding the girl's arm tightly enough to leave marks. "You're a pest, a curse on this house," the girl tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone. But the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. "You're going to be locked in your room until I decide what to do with you," continued the aunt, pushing the child down the hall. "And if I hear even a single noise, you'll know a punishment you've never experienced before." The room where the girl was locked was small and stuffy, with only a high window that she couldn't reach. There she curled up in the corner and began to hum her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort in a world that seemed to have forgotten she existed. It was that song that the teacher heard when she passed by the house on her way to the grocery store. The educator had spent the entire night thinking about the conversation with the girl in the yard, the marks she had seen on the child's arms, the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house. The teacher stopped in front of the gate and listened. The girl's voice was weak, but loaded with a sadness that made the educator's heart break. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the grocery store, the teacher went directly to the historic town's center, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the counselor well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "Anne, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. The counselor looked up from the papers she was analyzing. "Mrs. Davis, good to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger, my neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." The counselor straightened up in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious. During her 5 years as a Child Protective Services counselor, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious, and Mrs. Davis was not the type of person who would make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," said the counselor, grabbing a complaint form. While the teacher recounted her observations on the other side of town, the lawyer was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. The district attorney listened attentively as the lawyer presented the evidence collected by the businessman. "This is compelling evidence," said the district attorney, examining the videos on the lawyer's cell phone. "I will order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will that take?" asked the lawyer, concerned. With this evidence, we can act today, replied the district attorney. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services now. Thus, by a coincidence that would change the girl's destiny, two simultaneous complaints arrived at Child Protective Services on the same morning. The counsellor was finishing writing down Mrs. Davis's report when her phone rang. Child Protective Services, Anne speaking. Anne, this is the DA. I need you to make an urgent intervention at a house on Main Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse. The counsellor paused, her pen suspended over the paper. Is it by any chance the yellow colonial house? Exactly. How did you know? I just received a complaint about the same house, replied the counsellor, looking at Mrs. Davis with surprise. Two independent sources. That confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. The counsellor, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to Main Street. Mrs. Davis had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The businessman watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. His lawyer was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. You did the right thing, said the lawyer, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. I hope it's not too late, replied the businessman, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the colonial house. In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When the counsellor knocked on the door of the colonial house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in all the rooms. It was Mrs. Davis who first heard the faint voice coming from the room at the back. Someone's here, she said, guiding the team down the hall. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl curled up in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their hearts. The child raised her big, scared eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, sweetie," said the counsellor, crouching down to be at the child's height. "My name is Anne. We've come to help you." The girl looked at Mrs. Davis, recognizing the kind lady who had talked to her in the yard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "Auntie will be angry," she whispered. "You don't have to worry about that now," said Mrs. Davis, reaching out to the child. "Let's get out of here, okay?" And so, after months of silent suffering, the girl was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear. The girl's departure from the colonial house was a moment that would be etched in the memory of everyone present. The child held tightly to Mrs. Davis's hand, her steps small and hesitant as she crossed the door that had been her prison for so many months. Her big eyes scanned the streets of the historic town as if she were seeing the world for the first time. "Where are we going, Grandma?" asked the girl, using again the affectionate term she had given to Mrs. Davis. "To a safe place, my dear," replied the educator, gently squeezing the child's small hand. "A place where no one will hurt you ever again." The counsellor coordinated the operation efficiently, but her heart broke as she observed the girl's physical and emotional state. The child was visibly malnourished, her clothes were inadequate and dirty, and the burn marks on her arms told a story of systematic suffering that no child should know. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene through his window, a mixture of relief and anxiety consuming his chest. Finally, after days of torturous inaction, he had managed to do something concrete, but now a new concern haunted him. What would happen to the girl from here? His lawyer, who remained by his side, noticed his friend's tension. "The important thing is that she's safe now," he said. "We'll solve the rest, step by step." "But where are they going to take her?" asked the businessman, watching the small procession walking away down the cobblestone street. "Probably to a foster home while they investigate the case. It's standard procedure." At that moment, Mrs. Davis turned and looked directly at the window where the businessman was watching. Their eyes met for an instant, and the educator made a discreet nod, as if she knew that he had been a fundamental part of that rescue operation. Meanwhile, in the town's bar, the aunt finished her third glass of cheap whiskey when she saw unusual movement on her street through the establishment's blurred window. Her blood ran cold when she recognized official uniforms and people who clearly didn't belong in that quiet neighborhood. "What the hell is going on there?" she muttered, staggering up from the table. The bar owner followed her gaze. "Looks like there's authority at your house. You're not in trouble with the law, are you?" The aunt didn't answer. She threw some coins on the table and ran out of the bar, stumbling on the uneven stones of the sidewalk. Her heart was beating unevenly, not only from the alcohol, but from the growing terror that her actions had finally been discovered. When she arrived at her house, she found the door open and two social workers making detailed notes on the conditions of the property. The counselor was waiting for her in the living room, her expression serious and professional. "Are you the guardian of the child?" asked the counselor. "What are you doing in my house? Where's the girl?" The aunt tried to appear indignant, but her voice trembled visibly. "The child is under state protection," replied the counselor firmly. "We have received serious reports of mistreatment, and we have substantial evidence of child abuse." "That's a lie. I take good care of my niece." "Who made these false accusations?" The counselor showed her the official documents. "Ma'am, the child presents multiple injuries consistent with intentional burns, as well as obvious signs of malnutrition and neglect. We have recordings of the episodes of violence and witnesses who have witnessed the girl's suffering." The aunt paled. "Recordings? Witnesses?" She looked instinctively at the kitchen window, realizing for the first time that it was visible from the building across the street. She had always tortured the girl in that location, without worrying about who might be watching. "She's a difficult child," she tried to justify herself, but her words sounded weak even to herself. "Sometimes I had to be firmer, but I never hurt her on purpose. The situation is very serious. The child will be temporarily placed in alternative care while the case is investigated. You will have the right to a lawyer and may contest the accusations through the appropriate legal channels." Meanwhile, the girl was being taken to an emergency medical appointment at the town's small hospital. The local pediatrician was shocked to examine the child. In his 20 years of profession, he had seen cases of child abuse, but the systematization of the injuries on that girl was particularly disturbing. "These burns are all intentional," he explained to the counselor after the exam. "They all have the same pattern, suggesting repeated use of the same heated object. In addition, the child is significantly underweight for her age." "How long will she need to recover physically?" asked the counselor. "The burns will heal with proper care, but the psychological trauma, that will take much longer." The girl, wearing clean hospital pajamas, was sitting on a bed in pediatrics, watching everything around her with a mixture of fear and fascination. It was the first time in months that she had been in a truly clean and safe environment. Mrs. Davis had remained with her throughout the medical exam, offering herself as a family support figure. "Grandma, can I stay with you?" asked the girl, holding Mrs. Davis's hand. "We'll see what's possible, my dear," replied the educator, touched by the trust that the child placed in her. The counselor, observing the interaction between the two, began to form an idea. Mrs. Davis was a respected person in the community, with experience in early childhood education, and clearly the girl felt safe with her. Perhaps there was a solution that did not involve further separating the child from someone she already considered family. That afternoon, while the girl rested at the hospital under medical care, an important meeting took place in the Child Protective Services office. The counselor, Mrs. Davis, the lawyer, and to everyone's surprise the businessman, were gathered to discuss the immediate future of the child. "Sir, I understand that you knew the girl's mother," said the counselor, consulting her notes. "She worked for my company for 3 years. confirmed the businessman, his voice laden with emotion. She was an exemplary employee and a dedicated mother. If I had known what was happening with the girl... The important thing is that we know now, interrupted Mrs. Davis. The question is, what do we do from here? This child needs stability, love, and specialized care. The counselor addressed Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis, would you be willing to become a temporary foster family for the girl, considering that she has already established a bond with you? Mrs. Davis did not hesitate. Of course, I have experience with children. My home is suitable, and, well, I think the girl and I have already chosen each other. The lawyer spoke up. My client would like to contribute financially to the care of the child. He feels responsible, considering his connection with the girl's mother. The businessman nodded. I want to ensure that she has access to the best medical and psychological care available. I would also like to get to know her better, if that's appropriate. I feel like I owe that to her mother's memory. His investment funds, his Bitcoin assets, all his wealth accumulated over the years. Now all of that had a real purpose. The counselor made careful notes. We will proceed as follows. The girl will temporarily stay with Mrs. Davis while we do a complete evaluation of the family situation. You may contribute to the costs and, if you wish, establish a gradual relationship with the child, always supervised and with a focus on her well-being. When the meeting ended, the businessman felt relieved to finally have a concrete way to help. But he was also nervous about the prospect of personally meeting his former employee's daughter. What kind of connection could they form? And most importantly, would he be able to overcome his own guilt to become a positive presence in the girl's life? That night, the girl slept in a clean and safe bed for the first time in months. In the guest room of Mrs. Davis's house, surrounded by borrowed stuffed animals and covered with a warm blanket, she finally managed to rest without fear. Her last thoughts before falling asleep were about birds. No longer the trapped birds she drew on the walls of the aunt's house, but free birds flying high in the blue sky of the historic town. But at the local police station, the aunt was being interrogated about the abuse, and her contradictory answers only confirmed the suspicions of the authorities. The investigation was just beginning, and new revelations about the family's past were about to come to light. The girl's first week at Mrs. Davis's house was a period of delicate discoveries and gradual healing. The child woke up every morning at 6 o'clock, the time she used to be awakened by the aunt with screams, and stayed still in bed, waiting for the first sign of violence. When she realized that there was only silence and the aroma of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen, a shy relief took over her little heart. Mrs. Davis, with her decades of experience dealing with traumatized children, knew that recovery would be slow. She established a gentle routine: breakfast at the kitchen table lit by the sun, then free time in the flower-filled yard, and always, plenty of patience with the sudden silences and tremors that still afflicted the girl. "Good morning, my little flower," said Mrs. Davis every morning, using a gentle tone that made the girl's eyes fill with tears, not of pain, but of an emotion that she had almost forgotten existed. On the third day, something extraordinary happened. The girl was in Mrs. Davis's yard, watching a hummingbird that visited the red flowers of the garden, when she began to hum softly her mother's song. But this time, for the first time in months, her voice was not choked by fear. Mrs. Davis, who was watering the nearby plants, stopped to listen. It was a beautiful melody, full of longing but also of hope. When the girl finished, she looked at the educator with an almost self-surprised expression. "My mother used to sing this song," she said, her voice still weak but firmer than before. "She was a mother who loved you very much," replied Mrs. Davis, crouching next to the child. "And I'm sure she would be very happy to know that you are safe now." It was at that moment that the businessman appeared at the gate. It had been 3 days since he had been gathering the courage to make that visit. always finding an excuse to postpone it. His lawyer had scheduled the meeting with Mrs. Davis, explaining that it would be important for the girl's healing process to meet people who had loved her mother. The girl hid behind Mrs. Davis when she saw the tall, well-dressed man approaching. The businessman stopped a few feet away, noticing the fear in the child's eyes. "Hi," he said softly, crouching down to be closer to her height. "My name is... well, you can call me Uncle. I knew your mommy." The girl's eyes widened. It had been so long since anyone had talked about her mother that she had begun to wonder if her memories were real or just dreams. "You knew my mommy?" she asked, timidly stepping out from behind Mrs. Davis. "Yes, I knew her. She worked with me and always spoke of you with great affection. She said that you were the most important thing in her life." The girl processed this information in silence for a few moments. Then, to everyone's surprise, she took a step towards the businessman. "She sang a song to me," she said. "Grandma said she loved me very much." "Your mother loved you more than anything in the world," confirmed the businessman, feeling an intense emotion rise in his throat. "And she would be very proud to see how brave you are." During the following weeks, the businessman began to visit the girl regularly, always accompanied by Mrs. Davis and always respecting the child's pace. He was gradually becoming a familiar and comforting presence in her new life. It was during one of those visits that something happened that changed everything. The girl was playing in the yard with some toys that the businessman had brought. Not expensive or extravagant toys, but simple things like crayons and paper, which she used to draw her favorite birds. "Uncle," she said. She had started calling him that spontaneously. "Can you tell me more things about my mommy?" The businessman sat on the ground next to her, something he had never imagined doing before. "Sure, your mother was very smart. She organized all the important papers of my company and never made mistakes." "Was she pretty?" asked the girl, drawing what appeared to be a woman next to a bird. "She was very pretty. And she had a smile just like yours when you're happy." The girl smiled, and the businessman realized that it was the first time he had seen that child truly happy. The smile lit up her entire face, transforming her completely. "Uncle, can you be my daddy now?" she asked suddenly, with the cruel innocence that only children possess. The question hit the businessman like a thunderbolt. He looked at Mrs. Davis, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes, and then at the girl, who was staring at him with a hope so pure that it made his heart break and mend at the same time. "My dear," he began, carefully choosing his words, "I can't be your daddy, because you already had a daddy who loved you very much. But I can be someone who takes care of you, who protects you, and who will always be here when you need me." The girl considered this for a moment. "Like a real uncle?" "Exactly like a real uncle." That night, after the girl fell asleep, Mrs. Davis and the businessman talked at length on the porch of the house. The educator had noticed the transformation not only in the child, but also in the businessman. He had traded his formal suits for more casual clothes during the visits. His laughter had become more frequent, and she could see that taking care of the girl was healing something deep inside him. "She's recovering well," said Mrs. Davis, "but she still has nightmares some nights, wakes up crying and calling for her mother." "It's understandable," replied the businessman. "She's been through so much trauma. Do you think we should seek specialized psychological help? I'm already arranging that. I know an excellent child psychologist in the next town over. She can come here a few times a week." "I'll cover all the costs," said the businessman immediately. His dividend earnings, his return on investments, all of that finally had a greater purpose. "Can I ask you something?" said Mrs. Davis. "Of course. Why do you feel so responsible for the girl? I know you knew her mother, but there's something more, isn't there?" The businessman was silent for a long time, looking at the stars that shone over the historic town. Finally, he spoke. "When my former employee resigned, I was going through a very difficult period in my marriage. My wife and I argued constantly. I was focused only on my own problems. She tried to talk to me a few times. She seemed worried about something, but I was so absorbed in my own issues that I didn't pay attention." He paused, his voice choked with emotion. "If I had been a better boss, a better human being, maybe she would have felt comfortable telling me about her difficulties. Maybe I could have helped, prevented her from having to leave her daughter with her aunt." "You can't blame yourself for that," said Mrs. Davis softly. "I can, and I will carry that guilt forever, but now I have a chance to do something right, to honor her memory by taking care of her daughter." That night, the businessman made a decision that would change not only his life, but also the girl's future. He would contact his lawyer in the morning to discuss the possibility of officially becoming responsible for the child, along with Mrs. Davis. Meanwhile, in the guest room, the girl slept peacefully for the first time in her life. In her dreams, she flew with the birds she drew, but now she didn't fly to escape. She flew for pure joy, knowing that there were people who loved her waiting when she came home. But at the police station, the investigation into the aunt had revealed disturbing information about the whereabouts of the girl's mother. The Child Protective Services counselor was about to discover a truth that would change everything again, and that would force the businessman and Mrs. Davis to face an impossible decision about the child's future. 2 weeks after the conversation on the porch, the girl had transformed into an almost unrecognizable child. Her hair, once always dirty and tangled, now shone under Mrs. Davis's loving care. Her cheeks had gained color, her eyes had regained the natural brightness of childhood, and she had begun to talk more, sharing small stories and asking curious questions about the world around her. On that Tuesday morning, something unexpected happened. The girl was drawing at the kitchen table when she asked Mrs. Davis, "Grandma, why did Auntie hurt me?" The question caught Mrs. Davis off guard. She had prepared for this moment, talking with the child psychologist about how to address the trauma when the girl was ready to talk about it. "My dear," said Mrs. Davis, sitting next to the child, "some adult people get very sad and angry with life, and sometimes hurt other people, especially little children like you. But that didn't happen because you did anything wrong." "I did do something wrong," insisted the girl, her voice getting small. "Auntie always said that I was a pest, that because of me, Mommy went away." Mrs. Davis felt her heart tighten. "Honey, look at me," she said, gently holding the child's face. "Your mommy didn't go away because of you. Your mommy loved you more than anything in the world, and you were never a pest. You are a blessing." At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was the businessman, arriving for his daily visit. When he entered the kitchen and saw the girl with red eyes, he immediately worried. "What happened?" he asked, crouching next to her chair. "The girl was telling me about her feelings," explained Mrs. Davis. The girl looked at the businessman with a serious expression beyond her 4 years. "Uncle, Auntie said that I killed my mother. Is it true?" The question was like a punch in the stomach for the businessman. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength to answer as gently as possible. "Honey, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you," he began, his voice firm but affectionate. "Your mother left because she got sick, very sick. It had nothing to do with you, and wherever she is now, she is proud of the brave girl that you are. But if I hadn't been born, she wouldn't have gotten sick," insisted the girl. "If you hadn't been born, your mother would never have known true happiness," replied the businessman. "She told me that you were the light of her life, the reason why she smiled every day." The girl processed these words in silence. Then something unexpected happened. She got up from the chair and hugged the businessman, a tight and desperate hug from a child who had finally found a safe haven. "I like you, Uncle," she murmured against his chest. "I like you very much too," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. That afternoon, while the girl played in the yard, Mrs. Davis and the businessman received an unexpected visit. The Child Protective Services counselor arrived with a worried expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said, sitting in the living room. "I received news about the girl's mother." "What happened?" asked Mrs. Davis, immediately alert. During the aunt's interrogation, she revealed information about the mother's whereabouts. Apparently, she didn't leave as we thought. The silence that followed was deafening. The businessman and Mrs. Davis looked at each other, slowly processing what they had just heard. "What do you mean?" murmured Mrs. Davis. "The girl's mother is alive," said the counselor directly. "She's been in a psychiatric clinic in the state capital for 4 years. The revelation hit the two like a tsunami. The businessman got up abruptly, walking to the window, while Mrs. Davis covered her face with her hands. "That's impossible," said the businessman. "The girl told us that her mother that she had left." "That's what the aunt told the child," explained the counselor. "The mother had a severe nervous breakdown after the constant mistreatment by her sister. She tried to hurt herself and was admitted for treatment. The aunt took custody, claiming that her sister was incapacitated." "And she never got better?" asked Mrs. Davis, tears in her eyes. "She's getting better now," said the counselor. "The doctors say that she has been asking for her daughter constantly in recent months. The treatment is working." "My God," whispered the businessman. "And now, what does that mean for the girl?" "It means," said the counselor carefully, "that the mother has the legal right to her daughter. If she is deemed fit by the doctors—" "No," said Mrs. Davis firmly. "The girl has barely begun to recover. She has formed bonds with us. She can't be ripped from all this again." "I understand your concern," said the counselor, "but we have to consider what is best for the child in the long term. A child has the right to be with her biological mother." The businessman's lawyer spoke up when consulted about the situation. "There are legal precedents for situations like this. We can argue that the sudden change would be detrimental to the child's emotional well-being." "What about the mother?" asked the businessman. "Does she know that we found the girl?" "Not yet," replied the counselor. "We wanted to talk to you first." "But she will have to be informed soon." The businessman returned to his chair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. His investments in gold, his net worth, all his fortune. None of that mattered in the face of the possibility of losing the child who had become the center of his life. "How are we going to tell this to the girl?" asked Mrs. Davis. "Very carefully," said the counselor. "Maybe we should consult the psychologist first." That afternoon, an emergency meeting was scheduled with the child psychologist. The specialist listened to the entire situation with professional attention, making notes as she processed the implications. "This is an extremely delicate situation," she said. "The girl genuinely believes that her mother has left this world. Discovering that this is not true will be a huge shock." "How should we approach this?" asked Mrs. Davis. "Gradually. First, we need to prepare the child for the possibility of changes, then introduce the idea that her mother may be alive, and finally, if it is inevitable, prepare for a possible reunion." "What if the mother wants the girl back immediately?" asked the businessman. "Then we will have to fight in court," replied the psychologist. "But based on what I have observed, the girl is in a stable and loving environment. Any drastic change could be devastating for her emotional development." That night, the businessman and Mrs. Davis returned home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The girl was waiting for them with a drawing she had made. A house with 3 happy figures in front, her, Mrs. Davis, and the businessman. "Look what I drew," she said excitedly. "Our family." Mrs. Davis hugged the child extra tightly, trying not to cry. "It's beautiful, my dear. We are a real family now, aren't we?" asked the girl, looking at the 2 adults with hope. "Forever," promised the businessman, even though he didn't know if he could fulfill that promise. That night, after the girl fell asleep, the businessman and Mrs. Davis talked late into the night about the impossible situation they found themselves in. "I can't lose her," said Mrs. Davis, tears running down her face. "She has become my daughter in my heart." "Neither can I," replied the businessman, "but if the mother wants her daughter back, then we'll fight," said Mrs. Davis with determination. "We will fight for the girl, for the family we have built. She deserves stability, not another traumatic turn in her life." It was a battle that neither of them had foreseen, but both knew that they would do anything to protect the child who had changed their lives forever. His assets, his cash flow, all his accumulated capital, the businessman was willing to use all of it to ensure that the girl remained safe and loved. The week following the revelation about the mother was one of the most difficult that the businessman and Mrs. Davis had ever faced. Both struggled to maintain a normal appearance in front of the girl, but the child, with her sharp sensitivity, perceived that something was different. "Grandma, why are you sad?" she asked one morning, while Mrs. Davis tried to focus on preparing breakfast. "I'm not sad, my dear. I'm just thinking about some adult things," replied the educator, forcing a smile. "Is it about our new house? You don't want to move anymore?" continued the girl, remembering the conversations about finding a larger place to live together. "Of course I do. We will be very happy in the new house." But internally, Mrs. Davis questioned whether they would actually go to the new house, or if all the life they had built together was about to crumble. That afternoon, the child psychologist made a visit to begin gradually preparing the girl for the possible changes. She sat with the child in the yard, where they used to have their most important conversations. "Honey, do you remember your mommy?" asked the specialist gently. "Of course I remember. She used to sing to me and make me fritters," replied the girl, her eyes shining with happy memories. "And do you remember when she left?" The girl's face darkened. "Auntie said she went to heaven because of me." Sometimes adult people tell things that aren't true. Your mommy didn't leave because of you, and maybe she didn't go to heaven. The girl's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when people get very sad or sick, they need to go to special places where other people take care of them until they get better. Like the hospital, where I went when Auntie hurt me?" "Similar to that, yes." The girl was silent for a long time, processing this new and confusing information. "Is the doctor saying that my mother might be alive?" The psychologist took a deep breath. "It's a possibility, yes." Tears began to run down the girl's face, not of sadness, but of a complex emotion that mixed hope, confusion, and fear. "But if she's alive, why didn't she come to get me? Why did she let Auntie hurt me?" "Because she was very sick, my dear. Sometimes when people are sick in their mind, they can't take care of themselves, let alone other people." That night, the girl practically couldn't sleep. She ran to Mrs. Davis's room several times, full of questions that the educator struggled to answer appropriately. "Grandma, if my mother is alive, will she want to take me away from you?" The question that Mrs. Davis most feared had finally arrived. She hugged the girl tightly, trying to convey security that she herself didn't feel. "We don't know yet, my dear. But what I can promise you is that we will always fight for what is best for you." "I don't want to leave," said the girl, her voice small but determined. "You are my family now, and we always will be," promised Mrs. Davis, even though she didn't know if she could fulfill that promise. 2 days later, the lawyer brought news that changed everything again. The girl's mother had been informed about her daughter's situation and was insisting on seeing her immediately. "The doctors say she is stable enough for a supervised meeting," explained the lawyer during an urgent meeting. "Legally, we can't deny her that right." "But the girl has barely begun to process the information that her mother may be alive," protested the businessman. "A meeting now would be too traumatic." "I agree," said the Child Protective Services counselor. "But the mother is threatening to file a lawsuit if we don't allow the meeting. And unfortunately, she has legal rights over her daughter." The psychologist spoke up. "If the meeting is inevitable, then at least let's do it in the most controlled way possible. Neutral environment, limited duration, and with all of us present to support the girl. It was decided that the meeting would take place in the psychologist's office the following Saturday. The mother would be brought from the clinic accompanied by a nurse and a psychiatrist, while the girl would have the support of Mrs. Davis, the businessman, and the Child Protective Services counselor. During the days leading up to the meeting, the girl oscillated between excitement and terror. Sometimes she drew figures of a woman she called Mommy. Sometimes she hid under the bed crying. "What if she doesn't like me anymore?" she asked one night. "What if she thinks I've grown up ugly?" "Your mother will think you're the most beautiful child in the world," replied the businessman, even though he himself was terrified of the possibilities of that meeting. On Saturday morning, the girl woke up earlier than normal. She had chosen her prettiest dress, a yellow one with flowers that Mrs. Davis had bought for her, and asked the educator to make 2 braids in her hair. "I want to be pretty for Mommy," she said, looking at herself in the mirror with a mixture of anxiety and hope. The psychologist's office had been prepared especially for the meeting. Toys and books were scattered around the room to create a more relaxed atmosphere, and chairs had been arranged so as not to intimidate either the mother or the daughter. When the mother arrived, the businessman was shocked by her appearance. The woman he remembered as a cheerful and efficient employee had become a fragile figure, too thin, with grey hair and eyes that reflected years of suffering. But when she saw the girl, her expression transformed completely. "My little one," whispered the mother, tears running down her face. "My beautiful girl." The girl hid behind Mrs. Davis, observing the woman who was her mother, but who was also a stranger. The 4-year-old child she remembered had grown up, changed, formed bonds with other people. "Hi, Mommy," said the girl timidly. "You've grown so much," said the mother, controlling the impulse to run to hug her daughter. "You're so pretty, so healthy." Gradually, with the careful mediation of the psychologist, mother and daughter began to talk. The mother said that she had been sick, that she thought about the girl every day, that she deeply regretted having left her daughter with her aunt. "I didn't know she was going to hurt you," said the mother, her voice broken by crying. "If I had known, I never would have—" "It's okay, Mommy," said the girl, her childish compassion speaking louder than any hurt. "Now I'm safe with Grandma and Uncle." It was at that moment that the reality of the situation hit the mother. Her daughter had created a new family, people who clearly loved and cared for her. She looked at Mrs. Davis and the businessman, seeing the genuine love in their eyes when they looked at the girl. "You took good care of her," said the mother, addressing them. "I can see that she is loved." "Very loved," confirmed Mrs. Davis, her voice choked. The meeting lasted 2 hours, enough time for mother and daughter to reconnect minimally, but not so much that it was overwhelming for either of them. When it was time for the mother to leave, she knelt in front of the girl. "My dear, Mommy needs to go back to the place where she is healing, but I will think about you every day." "Will you get better?" asked the girl. "I'll try very hard. And when I'm completely well, we'll talk about our future, okay?" The girl nodded, hugging her mother for the first time in years. It was a brief hug, still hesitant, but full of possibilities. After the mother left, the girl was quiet for a long time. Finally, she looked at Mrs. Davis and the businessman. "She seems sad," said the girl, "but I still want to stay with you." That night, while the girl slept exhausted from the emotional meeting, the businessman and Mrs. Davis received a call that would change everything once again. It was the psychologist, with news about a conversation she had had with the mother after the meeting. "The mother has made a decision," said the specialist. "A decision that you need to hear." The businessman felt his assets, all of his dealings, all of his wealth lose importance in the face of the uncertainty of the child's future as she had become the center of his life. The psychologist's call left the businessman and Mrs. Davis in suspense for an entire night. The specialist had asked to meet the next day for an important conversation about the mother's decision, but had not given details over the phone. On Sunday morning, the two headed to the office while the girl stayed with a trusted neighbor of Mrs. Davis. The child had woken up talking about the meeting with her mother, mixing joy at having seen her with relief at still being with her chosen family. "She's still sad," the girl had commented during breakfast, "but I think she wants to get better." In the office, the psychologist greeted them with a serious but not somber expression. There was something in her eyes that suggested the news wouldn't be devastating. "The mother spent the night talking to me and the doctors at the clinic," she began. "The meeting with the girl was a defining moment for her." "Defining how?" asked Mrs. Davis, nervously wringing her hands. She realized that her daughter has built a new life, a family that truly loves her. And more importantly, she understood that forcing a change now would be harmful to the child. The businessman leaned forward. "What exactly did she decide?" "The mother will not claim immediate custody of the girl," said the psychologist. "She recognizes that she is not yet fully healed and that her daughter needs stability." The relief that took over Mrs. Davis was so intense that she began to cry. The businessman took her hand, himself fighting back emotion. "But there are conditions," continued the specialist. "The mother wants to maintain regular contact with the girl while she continues her treatment. She also wants to participate in important decisions about her daughter's education and future." "That's fair," said the businessman immediately. "She is the biological mother. She has that right." "And when she is completely healed?" asked Mrs. Davis, still worried about the future. "The mother was very clear about that," replied the psychologist. "She said that if one day she is completely well, she would like to have her daughter back, but not abruptly. It would be a gradual transition, only if it was best for the child." "And how did the girl react to this possibility?" asked the businessman. "We haven't talked to her about that yet. I thought it best to hear your opinion first." Mrs. Davis wiped away her tears. "The important thing is that she is safe with us for now. And if one day the mother is really well, we will face that situation when it comes." "There's something else," said the psychologist. "The mother made a special request. She would like you to consider moving closer to the state capital to make visits easier." The businessman and Mrs. Davis looked at each other. They had just settled in the historic town, but if it meant keeping the girl and giving the mother a chance to gradually reconnect with her daughter. "We can consider it," said the businessman. "My company can expand to other cities, and Mrs. Davis can work as an educational consultant anywhere. His stock investments, his fund returns, all his capital, it finally had a purpose that went beyond accumulating wealth." When they returned home, they found the girl playing in the yard with the neighbor, drawing more birds on a large sheet of paper. "Hi, Grandma! Hi, Uncle!" she shouted, running to hug them. "I drew Mommy with you." The drawing showed 4 figures now: Mrs. Davis, the businessman, the girl, and a long-haired woman representing the mother. All were smiling, surrounded by the inevitable colorful birds. "It's beautiful, my dear," said Mrs. Davis. "Did you enjoy seeing your mommy yesterday?" "I did, but she was too thin. I think she needs to eat Grandma's cookies to get strong." The girl's innocence deeply touched the two adults. Even at 4 years old, she intuitively understood that her mother needed care. That afternoon, the psychologist came to dinner with them. She had become almost part of the family in recent weeks. During the meal, she carefully explained to the girl that her mother would like to see her more often, but that she would continue to live with Mrs. Davis and the businessman. "Can I see Mommy again?" asked the girl, excited. "Yes, you can. Maybe once a week while she gets better." "And will she like my drawings?" "I'm sure she will." 2 weeks later, a new routine was established. Every Saturday, the girl visited her mother at the clinic, always accompanied by Mrs. Davis or the businessman. The meetings were supervised initially, but gradually became more natural. The mother was visibly improving. She had gained weight, her hair was better cared for, and most importantly, There was a new light in her eyes. Seeing the girl happy and safe seemed to be the best medicine for her recovery. "She's becoming a beautiful girl," said the mother to Mrs. Davis during one of those visits. "Thank you for taking such good care of her." "No need to thank me," replied Mrs. Davis. "The girl has become the daughter I never had." It was during one of those conversations that the mother made a revelation that surprised everyone. "There's something you need to know about the girl's father," she said, looking nervously at the businessman. The businessman felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" He worked at your company too. He was the engineer in the project department." The businessman remembered immediately. The man had been an excellent employee who had left the company around the same time as the girl's mother, claiming to have received a better offer in another state. "He's the girl's father?" asked the businessman, still processing the information. "Yes, but he doesn't know. When I found out I was pregnant, he had already left. I tried to contact him, but I never could." "Why didn't you ever tell me this when you worked for me?" "Because I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of judgment. And when he left, well, I thought it best to raise the girl alone." This revelation brought a new dimension to the story. The girl had a living father somewhere, a man who didn't even know of her existence. "Would you like us to try to find him?" asked the businessman. The mother thought for a long moment. "Maybe. When I'm completely well, maybe it will be time for her to meet her father too." That night, back in the historic town, the businessman and Mrs. Davis talked about this new revelation while the girl slept peacefully. "Our family could get even bigger," commented Mrs. Davis. "Are you scared of that?" asked the businessman. "A little," she admitted, "but if it's best for the girl, we'll face it together." It was then that the businessman made a decision that had been maturing for weeks. "Mrs. Davis, there's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "Will you marry me?" The question caught Mrs. Davis completely off guard. They had become life partners, united by the love they shared for the girl, but marriage had never been discussed. It's not just for the girl," he hastened to explain, "although she brought us closer. It's because I've discovered that you are the most generous, courageous, and loving person I have ever known, and I can't imagine my life without you." Mrs. Davis looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. He had gone from distant neighbor to partner, from stranger to family. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." The next morning, the girl woke up to find the two most important adults in her life with mysterious smiles on their faces. "We have a surprise for you," said Mrs. Davis. "Uncle and I are going to get married. That means he's going to be your heart daddy officially." The girl was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, her face lit up with the most radiant smile they had ever seen. "Are we going to be a real family?" she asked. "We already are," replied the businessman, picking her up. "Now we're just going to make it official." At that moment, looking out the kitchen window at the street where it had all started, the businessman thought about how life had a mysterious way of fixing broken things and creating beauty from pain. His assets, his dividend earnings, all his accumulated fortune, now all of that served to protect and sustain the family he had never planned for, but that had become the most important thing in his existence. The months that followed brought a stability that none of the three had experienced before. The marriage of the businessman and Mrs. Davis was a simple and intimate ceremony in the historic town's colonial church, with the girl as flower girl, wearing a pink dress that she had chosen personally. "Now we're a real family on paper too," said the girl during the party, holding the hands of the two adults who had become her heart parents. The move to a larger house finally happened, but not far from the state capital as had been suggested. Instead, they found a perfect property on the outskirts of the historic town, a farmhouse with spacious gardens where the girl could play freely, but still close enough to maintain her roots and facilitate visits to her mother. The businessman had diversified his investments, buying the property with funds from his stock and investment fund returns. His wealth in dollars and euros now served to create a truly safe home for the family. The weekly visits to the mother became a natural part of the family routine. With each meeting, the girl and her biological mother got to know each other a little better, gradually building a relationship that respected both the past and the present. Mom, as the girl had begun to call her biological mother to differentiate her from Mrs. Davis, who was simply Grandma. "You're getting stronger," commented the child during a visit. "I am, my dear. And it's because you give me strength to get better," replied the mother, who had truly transformed. Her hair had returned to its natural shine, she had gained healthy weight, and most importantly, she had regained the serenity that the businessman remembered from when she worked for him. It was during one of those visits that the mother made an announcement that would once again change the dynamics of the family. "The doctors said I can be discharged from the clinic next month," she said, carefully observing everyone's reactions. "I'm going to live in an assisted living facility in the state capital, where I will have independence, but still have psychological support when needed." The silence that followed was filled with complex emotions. The girl, now 5 years old and more mature, immediately understood the implications. "Does that mean you can come visit us at our house?" she asked. "It means exactly that," replied the mother with a smile. "If your parents agree, of course." "Of course we agree," said the businessman immediately. "You will always be welcome." "And maybe," continued the mother hesitantly, "we can start talking about that subject we discussed before." Everyone knew she was referring to the girl's father. In recent months, the businessman's lawyer had made some discreet inquiries and discovered that the engineer was living in another state, working at a construction company, and, according to the information collected, single and without children. "Are you sure you want to contact him?" asked Mrs. Davis. "I think the girl has the right to know her father," replied the mother, "but only if you agree. You are her parents now, and I respect that completely." The girl, who was listening attentively, asked the question that everyone expected. "If I meet my blood daddy, will you still be my parents?" "Forever," promised the businessman, hugging her. "Nothing and no one can change that." 2 weeks later, an unusual meeting took place at the farmhouse. The girl's biological father had accepted the invitation to meet the daughter he didn't know existed, and now he was sitting nervously in the living room, looking at the child with a mixture of amazement and emotion. "She has your eyes," commented the mother, who had been released from the clinic the day before and was making her first visit to her daughter's new home. The father, a tall and dark-haired man of 35, watched the girl with fascination. "I can't believe I have a daughter," he murmured, "and that she is so beautiful and intelligent." "Want to see my drawings, Daddy?" asked the girl, naturally using the name she had decided to give him. "Of course I do," he replied, clearly moved. During the following hours, a new family dynamic began to form. The father showed himself genuinely interested in getting to know the girl and in being part of her life, but also respectful with regard to the role of the businessman and Mrs. Davis. "You saved my daughter," he said to the couple, "and you gave her something that I never could have given, a stable and loving family. I am eternally grateful." "She saved us too," replied Mrs. Davis. "The girl taught us what unconditional love is." It was decided that the father would visit the girl once a month and that they would gradually try to build a father-daughter relationship that complemented, not competed with, the bonds she had already formed. "Now I have 4 parents," joked the girl one night, while Mrs. Davis put her to sleep. "Daddy, Grandma, Mom, and Blood Daddy. And we all love you very much," replied Mrs. Davis, kissing the child's forehead. The following month, something extraordinary happened. The aunt, who had spent the last few months in treatment for alcoholism, asked to meet the girl. The initial request was denied by all the responsible adults, but the psychologist suggested that it might be therapeutic for both. "Not to restore bonds," she explained, but so that the girl can confront her past from a position of strength and safety. The meeting was carefully organized, with all parents present and with limited duration. The aunt, visibly transformed by the treatment, apologized to the girl with tears in her eyes. "I was very sick," she said, "and I hurt you in ways that should never have happened. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything." The girl, now more mature and secure, looked at the woman who had once been her source of terror. "Auntie, you hurt me a lot, but now I'm happy and safe. I know, and I'm glad that you have found people who truly love you." The meeting was brief, but brought a sense of closure that helped the girl move on completely. 6 months later, life at the farmhouse had found a perfect rhythm. The girl attended the local school, where she was one of the most beloved students, always drawing colorful birds and telling about her big and loving family. The biological mother had moved into a small apartment in the state capital and worked part-time as a secretary, visiting the girl every week. The father came from the other state once a month, always bringing carefully chosen gifts and stories about his work. "You know what impresses me the most?" said the psychologist during one of her regular visits, watching the girl play in the garden. "How she managed to integrate all these relationships without confusion or conflict. She simply accepted that she can have many people who love her." "Children are wiser than adults sometimes," commented the businessman, watching his heart-daughter teach a song to the real birds that visited the yard. Mrs. Davis smiled, thinking about how her life had changed completely. From a lonely retired educator, she had become a mother, a wife, and the center of an unconventional but deeply loving family. "Who would have thought that a 4-year-old girl who suffered in silence would change so many lives?" she commented. "She didn't just change our lives," replied the businessman. "She taught us that family isn't about blood or conventions. It's about love, protection, and choice." At that moment, the girl ran to them, holding a new drawing. A farmhouse surrounded by colorful birds, with 6 figures holding hands in front. Her, Mrs. Davis, the businessman, the biological mother, the biological father, and in a recent addition, the psychologist. "Look," she said proudly, "my complete family." And it really was. A family built not by chance or tradition, but by choice, love, and the determination of adults who decided that a child deserved all the happiness in the world. His compound interest, his cryptocurrency returns, all of the businessman's net worth. Now all of that served to sustain and protect this unique family that had formed from pain and transformed into something beautiful. A year later, on the eve of the girl's 6th birthday, an unexpected discovery brought turmoil to the family that seemed to have found its peace. Mrs. Davis was organizing some old papers in the home office when she found a dusty box that had belonged to the former owner of the property. "Honey, come see this," she called, carefully opening the box. Inside, there were old photographs of the house and documents that revealed a disturbing story. The businessman approached while Mrs. Davis flipped through the papers with increasing concern. "These documents show that our house was built on land that belonged to the girl's family," said Mrs. Davis, her voice trembling slightly. "Apparently, her grandfather sold the land decades ago to pay off debts." The businessman took the documents, examining the old deeds. His $1 million investments had bought a property that, ironically, had belonged to the family of the child they were now raising. "Does that mean she has legal rights over the land?" he asked, processing the implications. "I don't know, but there's something more disturbing here," continued Mrs. Davis, showing an old letter. This letter from her grandfather mentions that he was forced to sell because someone was pressuring the family. The letter, dated 20 years ago, spoke about influential people in town who had created financial difficulties on purpose to force the sale of the land for a price well below its real value. At that moment, the girl ran into the office, all dirty from playing in the garden. "What are you looking at?" she asked, curious as always. "Documents about our house, my dear," explained Mrs. Davis, quickly putting away the most disturbing papers. "We discovered that your family had a connection to this land." "Did my family live here?" asked the girl, her eyes shining with interest. "Your grandparents, yes, a long time ago," replied the businessman, avoiding going into details that could confuse or disturb the child. In the following days, the businessman decided to investigate the history of the property more deeply. Using his financial resources and business contacts, he discovered a network of corruption that had operated in the region for decades. City Hall officials had conspired with local businessmen to devalue rural properties, forcing families like the girl's grandparents to sell their land for paltry prices. Then, the same land was resold for real estate development with astronomical profits. "My God," murmured the businessman to his lawyer during an urgent meeting. "My own construction company may have indirectly benefited from this scheme years ago, when we started operating in the region." "You didn't know," replied the lawyer. "And the previous company that sold you the land may have been part of that network." The businessman felt nauseous, realizing that his fortune, built through businesses he believed to be legitimate, may have been tainted by corruption that harmed the family of the child he now loved as a daughter. Meanwhile, the girl's biological mother, during one of her weekly visits, made a revelation that further complicated the situation. "My father always said he was betrayed in the sale of the land," she commented casually while they were having tea on the porch. "He died believing that powerful people in town had conspired against our family." Mrs. Davis and the businessman exchanged meaningful glances, but didn't mention the discovery of the documents. "Did he ever say who those people were?" asked the businessman, trying to sound casual. "He talked about a group of local businessmen and politicians. He said they controlled who prospered and who failed in town, but I always thought they were just his theories." That night, after the girl fell asleep, the businessman and Mrs. Davis faced an impossible moral decision. Should they reveal the truth about the property and potentially destabilize the life they had built? Or should they keep silent to protect the family? "If we tell her, it could change how she sees us," said Mrs. Davis, tormented by the dilemma. "She may feel that we benefited from her family's suffering. But if we don't tell her, we'll be building our happiness on a lie," replied the businessman, equally conflicted. The situation was further complicated when the girl's biological father, during his monthly visit, brought information that he had discovered researching the family history. "I found some documents from my father-in-law," he said, referring to the girl's grandfather. "Apparently, he tried to sue people involved in the forced sale of the land, but the case was mysteriously dismissed." The businessman felt as if the world were collapsing around him. His assets, his cryptocurrency holdings, all his wealth, none of that mattered if he discovered that he had built his life on the injustice suffered by the family of the child he loved. During a tense family meeting, all the adults responsible for the girl, the businessman, Mrs. Davis, the biological mother, the biological father, and even the psychologist, discussed how to proceed. "The girl has the right to know the truth about her family heritage," argued the biological father. "This land was hers by right." "But she's just a child," countered Mrs. Davis. "This information could be devastating for her." "And there are legal implications," added the lawyer. "If the original sale was fraudulent, the girl may have rights over the property." It was the biological mother who offered a different perspective. "My father spent years bitter because of this land," she said. "I want my daughter to grow up in peace, not obsessed with past injustices." The girl, oblivious to all this tension, continued to live her normal life. She played in the garden, drew her birds, went to school, and was happy with her big and loving family. It was during one afternoon, when she was showing off her latest drawings, that she made an innocent comment that touched all the adults deeply. "You know what I like most about our house," she said. "It's that it feels like it was always waiting for us, like it was our home forever." Her simple words made the businessman realize something fundamental. The girl didn't see the house as property or inheritance. She saw it as home, as the place where she had found love and security. That night, the businessman made a decision that surprised everyone. "I'm going to transfer the ownership of the house to the girl," he announced during a family meeting. "Legally, it will be hers when she reaches adulthood, and I will create a trust fund with part of my investments to ensure her future." "You don't have to do that," protested the biological mother. "I do," he replied. "I can't change what happened to her family in the past, but I can guarantee that she has security in the future." Mrs. Davis held her husband's hand, moved by his decision. "What about the truth?" asked the biological father. "When are we going to tell her about the history of the land?" "When she is mature enough to understand," replied the businessman. "For now, let her just be a happy child." His dividends, his fund returns, all his cash flow, the businessman was reorganizing his entire fortune to ensure that the girl would never go through the financial difficulties that had destroyed her family generations ago. But while the adults were planning financial and legal protections, a new threat was forming. Some of those involved in the old corruption scheme were still alive and in positions of power in town, and they had discovered that someone was investigating the past. The family was about to face its greatest trial, one that would test not only their unity, but also their determination to protect the girl from forces that had harmed her family for generations. The following weeks brought a constant tension that hung over the farmhouse like a dark cloud. The businessman had begun to notice strange cars passing slowly by the property, always with the same occupants, middle-aged men who clearly weren't from around these parts. The girl, with her childlike sensitivity sharpened by past trauma, sensed that something was wrong. Her smiles became less frequent, and she began to cling more to Mrs. Davis, especially when they left the house. "Grandma, why does that car keep driving by?" she asked one morning while they were having breakfast in the kitchen. Mrs. Davis chose her words carefully. "Some people get curious about pretty houses like ours, honey, but you don't have to worry. We're taking care of everything." "Is Daddy taking care of it too?" "Of course. We're both always taking care of you." That afternoon, while the girl played in the garden under Mrs. Davis's watchful eye, the businessman arrived with his lawyer and a woman she didn't know. The woman was elegant, middle-aged, with a gentle but professional smile. "Honey," called the businessman, "come meet a special person. This is Dr. Ramirez. She's a lawyer, and she's here to talk to us about some important matters." The girl approached timidly. She had learned to trust the people, the businessman and Mrs. Davis introduced her to, but she still maintained a natural caution with strangers. "Hi," said Dr. Ramirez, crouching down to be at the child's height. "Can I ask you a few questions?" "You can," replied the girl, looking at Mrs. Davis for encouragement. "Do you like living here with your parents?" "I like it a lot. They make me cookies and read me stories." "And do you feel safe here?" "I do. No one hurts me here." The conversation continued for a few minutes, with simple questions that allowed the lawyer to assess the girl's emotional well-being and her adaptation to the home. When she finished, she joined the adults in the living room for a more serious conversation. "From my assessment," said Dr. Ramirez, "the child is visibly well-adjusted and happy in this environment. Your lawyer has shown me all the evidence about the property situation, and I believe you have a solid basis for protecting the child's rights." "How long will that take?" asked the businessman. "Property lawsuits can take months or years, but considering that you have already transferred the deed to the girl and created the trust fund, she is legally protected." Mrs. Davis sighed, relieved. "And what about the people who are watching us? Can they try anything?" "I've issued preventative restraining orders against the main people involved in the old scheme," replied the lawyer. "They can't approach the property or the family." That night, after the girl fell asleep, the businessman stayed for dinner with Mrs. Davis. It was something that had become routine, the two discussing the child's care, planning her future, and gradually strengthening as a couple in the face of adversity. "Do you have any regrets?" "About discovering the truth about the property. asked Mrs. Davis. The businessman thought for a moment. No, it was better to know than to live a lie, and now I can ensure that justice is done, even if belatedly. And you're not afraid of all this responsibility of facing powerful people? I am, he admitted, but it's a different fear than I felt before. Before I was afraid to get involved, to commit myself. Now I'm afraid to fail when our daughter needs me. Our daughter, repeated Mrs. Davis with a smile. I like how that sounds. 2 days later, the situation took an unexpected turn. The girl was playing in the backyard when she saw an elderly man approaching the gate. Unlike the other observers, this man seemed harmless, white hair, simple clothes, and a melancholic expression on his face. "Grandma!" called the girl, running inside. "There's a grandpa at the gate, Mrs." Davis went out to see who it was and found a man of approximately 70 years, clearly moved to observe the property. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Sorry to bother you," said the man in a trembling voice. "My name is Joe. I used to work for the father of the girl who lives here. I heard that she was found and is doing well." Mrs. Davis was surprised. "How did you know?" "Small towns, ma'am. News spreads. I took care of the land when her grandfather still owned it. I saw the family destroyed by the greed of others." At that moment, the businessman arrived and joined the conversation. The elderly man looked at them curiously. "Are you the ones who are taking care of the girl now?" "We are," confirmed the businessman. "And you want to see her?" "If possible. I promised her father, before he passed away, that one day I would tell his granddaughter about the true history of the family." The girl, who had been listening from the window, came out timidly into the yard. The elderly man looked at her with tears in his eyes. "You're just like your grandfather when he was a child," he said softly. "Same curious eyes, same smile." "Did you know my grandfather?" asked the girl, interested. "I knew him very well. I worked for him for 15 years. He was a good man who loved this land." During the following hour, the elderly man told stories about the girl's family, joyful stories about the grandfather, about how he cared for the land with love, about the plans he had to leave a legacy for his children. "Your grandfather planted that big tree back there," he said, pointing to a century-old tree. "Said it would be for his grandchildren to play in the shade." The girl ran to the tree, touching the trunk with reverence, as if she could feel the connection with the family's past. "Why did he have to sell the land?" she asked, returning to the adults. The elderly man looked at the businessman and Mrs. Davis, asking silent permission to answer. They nodded. "Bad people did bad things to force your family to sell," he explained in simple terms. "But now you're back, and the land is yours again." "The land is mine?" asked the girl, surprised. "It is," confirmed the businessman. "This house, this garden, all of this belongs to you. We only take care of it until you grow up." The girl processed this information with the seriousness that only children can have. "So I can stay here forever, with you, forever," promised Mrs. Davis. When the elderly man said goodbye, he left something precious, a small wooden chest that he had kept for decades. "This belonged to your grandfather," he said, handing the chest to the girl. "These are letters he wrote to you, even before you were born." That night, the family gathered to open the chest. Inside, there were letters yellowed with time, handwritten in careful handwriting. "My dear granddaughter," read Mrs. Davis aloud. "If you are reading this, it means that you have found your way back home. This land was built with love, and now it is yours by right." The letters spoke about love, about hope, about the importance of family, and about how the land was just the place where love grew. The girl listened to each word attentively, understanding for the first time that she wasn't just an orphaned child who had found a family. She was the heiress to a lineage of people who had loved that land as much as she did. "Now I understand why I felt at home here since the first day," she said when the reading ended. "It was because I was really coming home, his treasury investments, his wealth in funds, all of the businessman's assets, all of that had served to restore a historical injustice and return to a child what was always hers by right. But the revelation also brought a new responsibility. The girl now knew who she really was, and that would change how she saw her place in the world. While she slept that night, surrounded by her grandfather's letters and the toy birds that represented her freedom, a new phase of her life was beginning. A phase where she wasn't just a survivor, but an heiress with deep roots and a bright future ahead. The months following the discovery of the grandfather's letters brought a profound transformation in the girl. At 6 years old, she had developed a mature understanding about her own history and a confidence that surprised all the adults around her. "Now I know why I always liked to draw birds," she said one morning while showing her latest drawing to Mrs. Davis. "My grandfather wrote that the birds were free to come and go, but they always came back home, just like me." Mrs. Davis smiled, moved by the child's wisdom. "You understood perfectly, my dear." Life at the farmhouse had found a perfect rhythm. The girl attended the local school, where she stood out for her maturity and gentleness with her classmates. Her teachers often commented on how she had a special ability to comfort other children who were going through difficulties. The visits from the biological mother continued weekly, but now with a different dynamic. The woman had stabilized completely and gotten a full-time job as an executive secretary at a company in the state capital. More importantly, she had found peace with the current family arrangement. "I will always be your mother," she said to the girl during one of her visits, "but they are your day-to-day parents, and that's okay." The biological father had also settled into his new routine, visiting monthly and gradually building a solid relationship with his daughter. He had even started dating a music teacher who got along very well with the girl. "Daddy brought a new friend," announced the girl happily after a visit. "She plays the piano and said she can teach me." But it was during a Saturday afternoon that something extraordinary happened, something that would change everyone's perspective about the future. The girl was playing in the garden when she saw a luxurious car stop in front of the gate. A stylish woman of approximately 50 years got out, accompanied by a younger man carrying a briefcase. "Grandma," called the girl, running into the house. "There are important people outside." The businessman and Mrs. Davis went out to greet the visitors, immediately recognizing the woman as someone of influence in the region. "Good afternoon," said the woman with a professional smile. "I'm Eleanor Vance from the Regional Development Foundation. We'd like to talk to you about a special project." Intrigued, the couple invited them in. The girl, curious as always, hid behind the armchair to listen to the conversation. "We've heard the story of the family and the recovery of this property," began the woman. "Our foundation is developing a historical preservation project, and we would like to include this house." "What kind of project?" asked the businessman, cautious. "We want to transform this region into a protected historic district, telling the true story of the families that were harmed by the corruption scheme of the past. The girl's story would be central to that." Mrs. Davis exchanged glances with her husband. "And that would mean exactly what?" "Resources for complete restoration of the property, creation of a small museum telling the story of the family, and mainly a substantial educational fund for the girl." The man opened his briefcase and showed numbers that made the businessman impressed. The proposed value for the educational fund was equivalent to all of his wealth in Bitcoin. "But there's one condition," continued the woman. "The property would need to be open for public visitation twice a week, and the girl would have to be available occasionally to tell her story." The girl came out from behind the armchair, surprising the visitors. "Sorry for eavesdropping," she said with the honesty typical of children, "but I don't want our house to become a museum, and I don't want to tell my sad story to strangers." The firmness in the child's voice surprised all the adults. Eleanor Vance tried a condescending smile. "Honey, It would be a wonderful opportunity for you. You would become famous, and your story would inspire many people." "I don't want to be famous," replied the girl, approaching Mrs. Davis. "I just want to be happy with my family." The businessman stood up, indicating that the meeting had come to an end. "We appreciate the offer, but our daughter has spoken for all of us. This is our house, our home, and it's not for sale for any kind of project." After the visitors left, visibly frustrated, the family gathered on the porch to talk. "Are you sure about your decision?" asked Mrs. Davis to the girl. "It was a lot of money for your education." "I'm sure," replied the child with conviction. "Money doesn't buy family. And you already give me everything I need. His dividend earnings, his financial assets, all of the businessman's wealth." He realized that the girl had understood something that many adults take a lifetime to learn, that real value is not measured in money. That night, during dinner, the girl made an announcement that deeply moved her parents. "I want to throw a party," she said. "A party to thank all the people who helped me." "What kind of party?" asked the businessman. "I want to call Mom, Dad, the doctor who helped me, Grandma who saved me from Auntie, even Auntie if she wants to come. I want everyone to see how happy I am now." The idea was both simple and powerful. A celebration not only of a birthday, but of healing, of family, of overcoming. The party was organized for the following weekend in the garden of the farmhouse. Attending not only the immediate family, but also the Child Protective Services counselor who had coordinated the rescue, the psychologist who accompanied the recovery, the elderly man who had kept the grandfather's letters, and even some neighbors from the historic town who had witnessed the girl's transformation. Surprisingly, the aunt also attended. She was visibly changed by the treatment, thinner but with clearer eyes, and she brought a simple gift. A drawing she had made showing a free bird flying over a happy house. "Thank you for forgiving me," she said to the girl, tears in her eyes. "And thank you for showing me that it's possible to change." "Everyone deserves a second chance," replied the girl, with the wisdom that had always characterized her. During the party, while watching all the guests talking and laughing in the garden, the girl approached the businessman and Mrs. Davis. "Do you know what's the best part of our whole story?" she asked. "What is it, my dear?" replied Mrs. Davis. "It's that everyone got better. Mommy got healed, Daddy found a family, Auntie stopped drinking, you found a daughter, and I found a whole family. Everyone won." At that moment, observing his daughter distributing joy to everyone around her, the businessman understood that he had discovered the most profitable investment of his life. The unconditional love for a child who had transformed not only his existence, but the lives of all she touched, his investment fund holdings, his wealth in gold, all his financial investments. None of that compared to the return he had obtained by opening his heart to a girl who needed love. As the sun set over the farmhouse, painting the sky with golden tones that made the real birds seem magical, an unconventional but deeply united family celebrated not only a birthday, but a journey of healing that had lasted years and transformed many lives. The girl, now 6 years old and possessed of unshakable confidence, knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. And for the first time in her life, all the adults around her also knew. They belonged to each other, united by choice, love, and the determination to create something beautiful from difficult beginnings. 5 years had passed since the party that brought together the girl's entire extended family, and now, at 11 years old, she had become a confident and wise young woman beyond her age. The farmhouse had witnessed her transformation from a traumatized child to a balanced pre-teen, surrounded by love and security. On that special spring morning, the girl woke up with a different feeling in the air. It was the day when, finally, she would receive the news that everyone had been waiting for months. The final court decision on the property and the crimes of the past. "Today's the day, isn't it?" she asked the businessman during breakfast, demonstrating the maturity that had always characterized her. "It is, my dear," he replied, admiring how his daughter had grown. "But no matter what happens, nothing will change our family." Mrs. Davis, now with more grey hair, but with the same warm smile, served the coffee with the tranquility of someone who had learned that true happiness didn't depend on court decisions. "You know what I thought this morning?" said the girl, looking out the window at the garden where she used to draw birds years ago. "That it doesn't matter what the judge decides. This has always been my real home since day one." At 10 in the morning, the lawyer arrived with a smile that announced good news even before he spoke, accompanied by Dr. Ramirez and the Child Protective Services counselor, who had become a close friend of the family over the years. "The decisions were all favorable," he announced, opening a briefcase full of official documents. "The property is officially yours," he said, addressing the girl, "and all those involved in the corruption scheme that harmed your family have been convicted." "What about the money?" asked the girl, surprising the adults with her practical question. "The compensations are substantial," explained Dr. Ramirez. "Enough to guarantee your college education anywhere in the world and still have enough left over for you to do whatever you want with your life." The girl was quiet for a few moments, processing the information. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled and made a statement that perfectly summarized her personality. "I want to use the money to help other children like me. Children who need families who truly love them." The businessman felt his heart fill with pride. His fortune, his stock and cryptocurrency investments, all his accumulated wealth, none of that compared to the richness of character that his daughter had developed. That afternoon, an extraordinary family meeting took place in the garden of the house. Everyone was present. The biological mother, who had become a manager at the company where she worked. The biological father, who had married the music teacher and now had another young child. The psychologist, who remained a confidant of the family. And even the aunt, who had become a constant and beloved presence, completely transformed by the treatment. "I want to make a proposal to all of you," said the girl, demonstrating a confidence that was impressive. "I want to transform part of this property into a special place." "What kind of place?" asked the biological mother, curious. "A place where children who have gone through bad things can come to spend time with families who want to help. Not for adoption, but to show them that there is love in the world." The idea was revolutionary and touching at the same time. The girl had conceived, at 11 years old, a project that combined her personal experience with her desire to help others. "Would it be like a temporary foster home?" asked Mrs. Davis. "It would be like a healing home," corrected the girl, "where children can learn that they are loved before they find their forever families." The businessman looked at his daughter with absolute admiration. His profits, his gold investments, all his cash flow. Now he saw how all of that could be used to multiply the miracle that had happened in their own lives. "Let's make it happen," he said, without hesitation. "Let's build the most beautiful and welcoming place possible." In the months that followed, the transformation of the property began. Part of the house was expanded to include cozy rooms for visiting children, a library full of illustrated books, and an art studio where young artists could express their feelings through drawings and paintings. The girl actively participated in every decision, from choosing the colors of the walls to designing the playground that was built around the tree that her grandfather had planted decades ago. "I want every child who arrives here to feel like I felt on the first day," she explained to the architects, "safe, loved, and with hope." The project gained support from the entire community. The historic town, which had witnessed the girl's journey from rescue to her transformation into an extraordinary young woman, offered full support to the initiative. 6 months later, the Free Bird House, a name chosen by the girl herself, opened its doors to the first visiting family, a 5-year-old child who had gone through a situation similar to the girl, accompanied by potential adoptive parents. "Welcome to our house," said the girl to the visitors. using the same gentle words that Mrs. Davis had used with her years ago. "Here you are, family." During the week that the family spent on the property, the girl served as a bridge between the traumatized child and the adults who wanted to help. She knew exactly what to say, how to act, and mainly, how to convey hope. "How do you make it look so easy?" asked Mrs. Davis, watching her daughter playing patiently with the visiting child. "Because I remember what it's like to be scared," replied the girl simply, "and I remember how good it feels when someone shows you that you don't have to be scared forever." At the end of the first year of operation of the Free Bird House, 15 families had passed through the property. All the children found permanent and loving homes, and many of the families became close friends, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the original house. "Do you know what's the best part?" said the girl to the businessman one night while they watched the sunset from the garden where it had all begun. "It's that now our story isn't just about a girl who was saved. It's about a girl who learned to save others." The businessman hugged his daughter, thinking about how his life had completely changed since that afternoon when he heard the first screams coming from the colonial house. His dividend earnings, his Bitcoin returns, all his net worth, now all of that served to perpetuate a cycle of love and healing that would touch hundreds of lives. "Are you proud of me?" asked the girl, using the same small voice she had at 4 years old, but now laden with confidence instead of fear. "I'm the proudest man in the world," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "You have become exactly who your mother and your grandfather dreamed you would be." That night, after the girl fell asleep, the businessman and Mrs. Davis sat on the porch, watching the stars over the property that had become much more than a house. It had become a symbol of hope. "Can you believe everything that happened?" asked Mrs. Davis. "Sometimes it seems like a dream," replied the businessman. "A lost little girl who transformed us all into a family and now is transforming other families too." "It wasn't her who transformed us," corrected Mrs. Davis softly. "It was love. She just taught us how to love without conditions." And it was true. The girl, who had begun her journey as a 4-year-old child suffering in silence, had become a force of transformation that touched lives far beyond her immediate family. Her birds, drawn on the walls, were no longer symbols of imprisonment, but of freedom. Freedom to love, to heal, to grow, and to help others fly too. The farmhouse, built on injustices of the past, had become a place where justice, love, and hope flourished every day, proving that even the most difficult stories can have the most beautiful endings when there are people willing to love without reservation. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.